I'm extremely humble, once again, to have the privilege of presenting God's Word to God's people. We have a lot to unpack today, so I'm going to ask you guys to put your thinking cap on because this particular passage it's a little bit tricky to understand, but I think by God's grace we're going to get through it. So I'm going to read 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 1 to 18, but I'm going to kind of connect that with 1 Corinthians 8, where Pastor Corey preached last Sunday. So 1 Corinthians 8, the last verse, verse 13. Therefore, if food make my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. Chapter 8, the first verse. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not my workmanship in the Lord? If to others I am not an apostle, at least I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. This is my defense to those who would examine me. Do I not have the right to eat and drink? Do I not have the right to take along a believing wife as the other apostle and the brother of the Lord and Cephas? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working for a living? Who serves as a soldier on his own expense? Who plants a vineyard without eating any of his fruit? Or who tends a flock without getting some of the milk? Do I say those things on human authority? Does not the law say the same? For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain. Is it for oxen that God is concerned? Does he not certainly speak those for our sake? It was written for our sake, because the plowman should plow in the hope, and the thresher thresh in the hope of sharing the crop. If we have sown spiritual things among you, is it too much if we read material things from you? If others share those rightful claims on you, don't we even more? Nevertheless, we have not made use of this right, but we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ. Do you not know that those who are employed in the temple service get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in the sacrificial offerings? In the same way, the Lord commands that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living from the gospel. But I have made no use of those rights, nor am I writing those things to ensure any of such provision. For I would rather die than have anyone deprive me from ground for boasting. For if I preach the gospel, that gives me no ground for boasting, for necessity is laid upon me. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel, for if I do this on my own will, I have a reward. But if I'm not on my own will, I still am entrusted with a stewardship. What then is my reward? That in my preaching I may present the gospel free of charge, so as to not make my full right in the gospel. Let's put the setting. So Paul is dealing with the Corinthians. And he finished with chapter 8 by talking about food sacrificed to idols. So the elitist and super spiritual Corinthians were flaunting their knowledge, especially when it comes to eating food sacrificed to idols, so that the weak Christian, those that were saved from worshiping idols, are now led back into actually eating food sacrificed to idols and into idolatry. And Paul ended this chapter by saying that he insists by letting us know that he is willing not to eat any meat, none whatsoever, for the sake of his brother. So here's the principle. The principle is I'm willing to give up my own liberty for the cause of my brother and to not allowing my brother to stumble. So a lot of commentators are debating on the entire connection between chapter 8 and chapter 9 because he's talking about food sacrificed to idols, and then now Paul is talking about all of this, right? So the question really is not whether chapter 8 is connected to chapter 9, but how they are connected. And there's a flow to the connection because remember, when Paul was writing all of those, he was not writing with chapters and verses. It was one flow. Chapters and verses were added later, and sometimes that could interfere with the flow of what Paul is talking about. And we do have evidence that there is a flow of what he's talking about. Number one, there seems to be no connection between the last verse of chapter 8, verse 13, and he jumped right into chapter 9, verse 1. This is actually a rhetorical device way back. It's called a ascendaton. This is without conjunction. This is to put emphasis on the fact that I'm going through as a flow to what I'm talking about. Number two, the reason that we know that there is a flow is because Paul is repeating the same words that he has been talking about in chapter 8. Freedom, liberty, rights. Number three, we know that there is a flow because this entire section is actually one big unit. Basically, from chapter 8, the first verse, all the way to verse 13, Paul is going to be saying, I will never eat meat again if it is going to be a stumbling block to my brothers. All the way to chapter 11, when Paul is going to be saying, be imitators of me. So this is the entire passage. This is the flow. Paul is going to set himself up as an example to imitate, as an example of laying aside his right for the sake of his brothers. So chapter 9, let's set up the entire context. Chapter 9 really has 3 sections to it. Number 1, and this is what we're going to be preaching about. From verse 1 to 18, Paul is going to give us actually 6 legitimate reasons why he has the right for financial and material support from the church. The second section, from verse 19 to 23, Paul is going to give us more example of his legitimate right for receiving support. But also he's going to give us reason for why he relinquished those rights. And then the third portion of that chapter, from 24 to 27, Paul is going to give us the example or the metaphor of an athlete and how he buffeted his body. He put himself under subjection. Why? Because he's going to lay aside of all those rights, and it's going to require self-discipline to do that. So let's go back. We're going to be preaching from verse 1 to 18, and Paul is going to lay out that he has the right for financial support. And he's going to give us 6 reasons for that. Number 1, he's going to let us know that he is an apostle. So as such, he has the right. Number 2 is going to let us know that it is actually customary to pay somebody for the fruit of their labor, for what they are doing for a living. Number 3 is going to let us know that it is actually written in God's law. Number 4 is going to let us know that other elders, other leaders are actually receiving their compensation. So him too has such right. Number 5, it is a universal pattern for all ministries. And number 6, Jesus actually gave us the ordinance of exactly doing the same thing. So this is going to be the layout, but I need to give some further background. Remember, the Corinthians were the proud. They are super spiritual. They have freedom. They have liberty. And Paul is going to be telling them, live to be without. Voluntarily waiving your right. Prioritize love. And choose to avoid being a stumbling block to your brother. So 4 major points: waiving your right voluntarily, Go without voluntarily. Prioritize love and avoid being a stumbling block. So throughout the sermon, we'll be talking about principles. But I think it's important that we kind of set up and understand what we're talking about. So when it comes to biblical decision making, there are 3 criteria that I want you guys to keep in mind. There is what we call a biblical mandate, a biblical principle, and personal conviction. So biblical mandate, biblical principle, and personal conviction. So a biblical mandate, God, by virtue of his sovereignty, by virtue of his authority, by the fact that he is the creator, can and does actually set up certain rules that are non-negotiable. This is him by virtue of him being God. Those do not leave room for suggestion. They are not suggestion. God didn't give the 10 suggestions. Right? So think about it like the 10 Commandments, or think about them as the Great Commission. Jesus said, go to the nation. That's not up for debate, neither is it up for discretion. And then after that, we have what's called biblical principles. So biblical principles are enduring truth, moral law that are derived from the Scripture. But it requires wisdom and discernment to apply them to our daily life. So take, for example, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 9 from 18. Do not get drunk with wine. Or take Hebrew chapter 13, verse 4. Marriage is honorable in all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. This is a warning against adultery. Again, not up for debate. Those are clear principles from the Bible. Then there is what we call personal conviction. And those are personal belief that are derived from those principles. So they are derived from an informed conscience that helps you to apply those principles into the gray area of everyday life. So for example, we talked about the biblical principle, Ephesians 5:18. Do not get drunk with wine. Someone may say, you know what? Out of my own personal conviction, I'm never going to eat any alcohol. Or drink any alcohol. Or a biblical principle that says from Hebrew 13, verse 4, marriage bed is to be undefiled. Someone may come with a personal conviction and say, you know what? To protect my marriage and my integrity, I will never have lunch with a member of the opposite sex. And that's okay. That's their own personal conviction. But there is a warning to that, though, right? This is where you jump to what's called legalism. This is where you take your personal conviction and bring it up to the level of not only mandate and principle, and you are imposing it on somebody else. That's legalism. And Christ spoke about that with the Pharisees. Paul talked about that with the Judaizers. So this is, again, take that principle that says, do not get drunk with wine. That's a principle. Personal conviction. You know what? For me, I'm never going to drink any alcohol. And then you said, but you, if you drink alcohol, you're sinning. See, that's you elevating your own personal conviction into the level of the gospel. Your personal conviction is not the gospel. Or if somebody were to have the personal conviction saying, you know what, I'm never going to have lunch alone with somebody of his opposite sex because I want to protect my marriage. But if somebody is having a business dinner with somebody of the opposite sex, oh, you are sinning. That's your personal conviction. You are not allowed to impose it on somebody else. But Paul is going to go deeper into this. He's going to not only give us principle, he's going to give us his own personal conviction. He's going to tell us, be like me. And he has that authority because he's an apostle. So let's get into the sermon. All of this is, by the way, just introduction. So I know. So let's get into the sermon, really. 6 reasons why Paul is going to let us know he has the right for financial support. Number 1, he's an apostle. He's an apostle. He says, verse 1 to 4, And he's going to be launching like a sludge and torrent of rhetorical questions. And all of those rhetorical questions are embedded into them the answer. So all of them has a yes answer to it. So he's going to say, am I not free? Well, yes, I am. This is a status. He's free. Am I not an apostle? Well, of course I am. That's his authority as an apostle. Have I not seen the Lord? Well, yes, he did. That's his qualification. Are you not my work in the Lord? This is part of his resume. This is my experience. I planted this church. Yes, I did. This is not to lord over them, but to just let them know that as an apostle, I have those rights. Number two, he's going to give us some more about the right that he possessed as an apostle. Do I not have the right to eat and drink? Do I not have the right to take along a believing wife? So did Peter, Cephas, and the Lord's brother, James and Jude. Yes, he does. He does. And then he's going to say further, do I not have the right from refraining from manual labor? Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And he's saying, it's not me and Barnabas only that has the right not to work. He does have that right. He's going to go further to say that he's going to relinquish that right, but he wants to make sure that we understand he does possess such right as a minister of the gospel. Number two, so he's going to say it is actually customary. You ought to pay somebody for the work that they are doing. Who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard without eating any of the fruit? Or who tends a flock without getting some of the milk? The implied answer, well, no one. The military is not self-funded, right? No. A farmer is supposed to eat from the vineyard. A shepherd is supposed to drink the milk from the flock. So the other principle is that a worker's field of labor provide him with his sustenance. You're a carpenter, you eat the fruit from carpentry. You're a minister, you eat the fruit from your ministry. That's the principle. That's compensatory. That is universal. That's customary. And Paul is going to continue further by saying that it's actually written in God's law. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 4, you shall not muzzle an ox while it's threshing grain. And Paul is going to say, no, this is what we call an argument from the lesser to the greater. God is not really writing about oxen per se. He's talking about our sake. The plowman and the thresher act in hope of sharing in the harvest. He's going to continue further in verse 11 by saying that if I sow spiritual thing in you, is it too much if I reap material things? Well, no, it isn't. It's not. You're supposed to. And in other passages, for example, Galatians 6, verse 6, let him who is taught share all things with his teacher. Or 1 Timothy 5, verse 17, elders who labor in the word are worthy of a double honor. A minister has the right for financial and material support from the church. By the way, this is not, Corey and I, we didn't talk about this. But, look at that, verse 12, the second part. Nevertheless, we did not make use of this right, but we endure anything rather than to put an obstacle in the way of the gospel. I have the right. It is scriptural. It is natural. It is customary, but I have voluntarily I put aside those rights. Paul is going to go back and give some more universal patterns by saying that, listen, verse 13 to 14. It is actually in the Old Testament. Priests live from the offering and the tithes that they're supposed to receive. And Jesus later on says, so also the Lord direct those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. So after saying all of this for 14 chapters, establishing his right, he's going to be saying, yet I do not make use of those rights. Connecting chapters 8, verse 13. I have the right, I choose not to use that right. So one would wonder, why did Paul choose to do that? So a little bit of background in the Corinthian. They have this system called the patronage system. This is where somebody who's very rich would take upon himself a famous philosopher, for example, a famous preacher, and then he would pay for that particular individual. And as such, that particular individual, whether it is a pastor or whether it is a famous philosopher, would owe him some honor and services in return. There would be a reciprocal expectation, almost like a transactional endeavor, a transactional activities that take place. So Paul wanted to avoid that particular system, voluntarily said, you know what, I'm not going to take any money from the Corinthian. This is very interesting, though, because he did receive financial support from the Macedonians, from Philippi, from all the others, because they were not facing the same problem. And also, Paul did not want them to have the appearance that he's doing this out of greed. He's not preaching for the money. He's not. And you also want us to understand that I am willing, as an apostle, to humble myself enough and to show self-sacrifice enough. Again, connecting with chapter 8 by saying, if eating meat is going to be offensive to my brother, I'm willing to set it aside. He wanted to protect his integrity. Let's recap. Paul has the right. This is scripturally based, naturally based, culturally based, but he's willing to waive that right voluntarily. And he has some strong statement after this by saying that I'm not saying this for you guys to start paying me. I'm not using reverse psychology here. That's not it. As a matter of fact, I would rather die than to receive $1 from you guys. That's some strong words. Because actually, for me to preach, and I'm boasting in this, because for me to preach, I'm actually under compulsion. I cannot not preach. Because woe to me if I don't preach. It was something that was entrusted in me. I have to preach. So this is not, well, I'm asking for money, and none of that. I have an obligation placed upon me. But the right that comes from me being a minister, I'm willing to set it aside. So for Paul, he's willing to voluntarily set aside his right. He's willing to voluntarily be without. And he's going to be willing to prioritize love. Why? Because he wanted to avoid being a hindrance to the gospel. So how does that apply to us? I'm going to use two kind of sensitive subjects to talk about when it comes to application. Let's talk about political decision makings. I love it. So by the way, if you guys are upset by anything that I said, my name is Corey. Send your email. So in our daily conversation, especially when it comes to political discourse, we are still commanded to display Christ-like character, right? There are going to be some moment in which your opinion, although lawful, you have the right, is actually not going to be helpful. I mean, there are some in which they feel that their opinion is a blessing to everybody else. If you thought that your opinion is a blessing, think about what your silence could be. So, again, that does not mean you need to be a doormat, right? You can have your own, and as a matter of fact, there are certain opinions, political opinion actually, that follows a particular biblical principle, and you're supposed to stand up for those, right? Respect for human dignity, respect for life. All of those, and if you see injustice, yeah, you're supposed to speak up. But there are certain controversial issues. Really, should you really break relationship with a brother and sister over something that trivial by insisting that, no, I did my research? What? For example, a personal conviction for somebody because they said, the principle says avoid being a stumbling block. Somebody may say that, for me, I'm not going to have a political advertisement on my lawn. Because if I do, will I be able to preach to somebody that has a different political opinion? So the guiding principle is that the word that I'm about to say, the joke that I'm about to give, the opinion that I'm about to say, if I say it to you, will I be able to preach the gospel to you afterwards? If you can't, maybe you should zip it. How about in marriage? So again, Paul is not necessarily talking about marriage, but I couldn't just help but to just put this in there too. So we are called to voluntarily set aside, husband and wife, set aside some of our rights for the benefit of the other. So husband, I know what you guys are saying. Man, I'm glad you're preaching this because my wife is here and she needs to hear this, right? Or husband is saying, yeah, thank you, pastor, because that spouse of mine needs to hear it. So let me set up this thing. This particular reflection is to the person looking back at you in the mirror. This is for you, not for somebody else. And whether I was talking about political opinion, whatever, this is not for somebody, oh yeah, I'm glad you say this because so-and-so needed to hear it. That's not it. This is for you. Are there times to which, as a husband, you're supposed to set up your right for the sake of your spouse? The Bible says to husband, love your wife, and then to wife, to respect your husband. I'm not going to love her until she starts respecting me. Really? I'm not going to respect that guy until he starts loving me. Really? At the time in which you could actually set up those rights. Now again, we're not talking about being a doormat, right? There are times we're not talking about tolerating abuse by any form, whether it is physical, emotional, psychological. As a matter of fact, it violates the biblical principle of respecting one another, loving one another. So we're not talking about those extremes. But there are times in which, you're supposed to set aside all of those rights that we're clinging to for the sake of our spouse. I'm going to close with this. So I'm going to ask John to come. Can I invite you to make a conscientious and voluntary choice to set aside what you think you are entitled to for the sake of somebody else? Can I invite you to release anything that might hinder a deeper relationship to Christ? Can I invite you to prioritize love for Christ and for others, and to look beyond your self-interest? Can I invite you to cultivate a holy devotion to Christ? And just like Paul, he's willing to set aside legitimate right for the sake of the gospel. Can I invite you to willingly lay aside what you can claim to be for yourself? Can I invite you to surrender to Jesus Christ?